The dead own the streets, but I own the road. I wasn't supposed to be on the road that night. My regular route had been canceled 3 days earlier when the depot in Millfield shut down without explanation. No memo, no email, just a chain across the gate and a handwritten sign that read, "Closed until further notice." But Danny Hargrove called me at 4 in the morning, voice tight like a man swallowing glass, and asked if I could run a load of medical supplies from the distribution center in Caulfield down to the emergency staging area they'd set up outside Ridgeton. 240 miles of interstate, most of it through empty corridor towns that had been bleeding population for a decade. I told him I'd do it for triple rate. He didn't even negotiate. My name is Marcus Creed. I've been driving long haul for 11 years, 6 of those for Hargrove Logistics. And in all that time, Danny never once called me personally. He had dispatchers for that. The fact that he dialed my number directly told me everything his words didn't. Something had gone wrong in a way that couldn't be fixed by normal channels. I loaded the truck by 5:30. The distribution center was operating on skeleton crew, just me and a forklift driver named Tomas, who kept glancing at his phone between pallets. The cargo was standard medical freight: IV bags, bandages, antibiotics, surgical kits. But there were also 3 sealed crates with biohazard labels I'd never seen before, stamped with government codes that meant nothing to me. Tomas wouldn't make eye contact when I asked about them. The sun wasn't up yet when I pulled onto Interstate 44. The road was empty in a way that felt wrong. Not early morning empty, but abandoned empty. No other trucks, no commuters, no highway patrol. Just my headlights cutting through fog that clung to the asphalt like something alive. The radio was cycling between static and emergency broadcast tones. The kind they test once a month but never actually use. Except this wasn't a test. The automated voice kept repeating instructions to shelter in place, avoid contact with symptomatic individuals, and report to designated safe zones if relocation became necessary. I'd heard the rumors like everyone else. The first reports had come out of Mercer County 6 days ago. Some kind of aggressive infection that caused neurological deterioration, extreme aggression, loss of higher function. The news called it acute viral encephalitis for the first 2 days before they stopped calling it anything at all. Social media filled the gap with footage that looked fake until it didn't. People attacking people, people eating people. People who should have been dead, still moving, still biting, still spreading whatever poison lived in their blood. I told myself it was contained. That's what the governor said in his last press conference, the one where his hands shook and his security detail stood too close. Contained to Mercer County, then contained to the Tri-County area. Then the press conferences stopped. 30 miles into my route, I saw the first one. It was standing in the median, just past the Colton River Bridge. A woman in a hospital gown, barefoot on the gravel, her head tilted at an angle that suggested her neck wasn't working right. I was doing 70, and she was gone in 2 seconds. But in those 2 seconds, I saw her face in my headlights, and my hands went cold on the wheel. Her jaw was hanging open, distended, like the muscles that held it had simply quit. Her eyes caught the light the way an animal's do, reflective, empty, aimed at my truck with a focus that had nothing to do with thought. I didn't stop. I pressed the accelerator and watched her shrink in my mirror until the fog swallowed her. My phone buzzed. A text from Danny. "Don't stop for anything. Ridgeton needs that cargo. People are counting on you." I typed back with one hand, "What's actually happening, Danny?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then his response came through, just 4 words that made my stomach drop. It's not contained anymore. The next 60 miles taught me what not contained looked like, from the cab of a freight truck doing 85 on an empty interstate. I passed 4 cars pulled to the shoulder with their doors open and nobody inside. I passed a school bus jackknifed across the eastbound lanes, its yellow paint smeared with something dark that my headlights turned black. I passed a rest stop where the lights were still on, but the parking lot held a dozen vehicles arranged in a circle, headlights pointing inward, like whoever was there had tried to create a perimeter. I didn't stop for any of it. The radio found a live broadcast somewhere around mile marker 112. A woman's voice, professional but strained, reporting from what she called the Mobile Emergency Operations Center outside of Canton. She was listing towns that had been designated as compromised zones, places where the infection rate had exceeded the capacity of local emergency services to respond. The list was long. It included Millfield, which explained the chain on Danny's depot. It included 3 towns on my route. I called Danny. He picked up on the first ring. "Marcus, where are you?" "Passing Canton. The radio says half my route is compromised." "Stay on the interstate. Don't exit. The infection spreads through populated areas. They're saying it follows density. The highway should be clear as long as you keep moving." "Should be?" "I'm giving you what I have, Marcus. The situation is changing by the hour." "Those sealed crates in my cargo. What's in them?" Silence. Then, "Antivirals. Experimental. They think it might slow progression if administered early enough." "You're telling me I'm carrying the cure?" "I'm telling you, I'm carrying hope, and you're the vehicle. Get to Ridgeton." He hung up. I gripped the wheel and watched the road eat itself under my tires. The fog was thinning as dawn approached, replacing mystery with clarity I wasn't sure I wanted. The landscape on either side of the interstate was flat farmland, interrupted by clusters of buildings that might have been small towns or might have been industrial parks. Hard to tell at speed, in that gray pre-dawn light that made everything look like a photograph left in the rain. At mile marker 128, I had to slow down. There was a blockade ahead. Not official, not military, but civilian. Someone had parked 3 pickup trucks across both lanes and strung orange construction fencing between them. Behind the trucks, I could see people moving. 5, maybe 6 figures. They had weapons. Rifles, shotguns, what looked like a baseball bat wrapped in wire. I downshifted and brought the truck to a crawl. A man stepped forward, raising his hand. He was wearing a hunting vest and a respirator mask that covered most of his face. I cracked my window 2 inches. "Road's closed," he said. His voice was muffled by the mask. "Can't let vehicles through. Infections moving along the highway." "I've got medical supplies for Ridgeton," I said. "Emergency staging area. Don't care what you've got. Nothing goes through." A woman appeared beside him, younger, maybe early 30s, with a deer rifle held at a diagonal across her chest. "Let him through, Carl. He's got a freight truck, not a sedan full of refugees." "Protocol is protocol, Nina. Your protocol, not anyone else's. We agreed to screen, not blockade." Carl turned to her, and in that motion I could see the tension between them. Not romantic, but structural. 2 people who'd agreed to work together without agreeing on what the work meant. Nina looked at me through my window crack with eyes that were calculating rather than afraid. "Where'd you come from?" she asked. "Caulfield. Left at 5:30. "Caulfield still standing?" "Was when I left." She nodded once, then turned to Carl. "Move the truck. Let him pass. If Ridgeton still has a staging area, They need what he's carrying more than we need a barricade." Carl hesitated. Behind him, the other figures shifted, uncertain, waiting for a decision that would tell them who was actually in charge. I watched Nina hold Carl's gaze without blinking, and after 4 long seconds, he turned and waved at the others to pull the rightmost truck aside. Nina walked alongside my cab as I idled through the gap they'd made. She kept pace easily, one hand resting on the door frame, speaking through my cracked window like we were neighbors chatting across a fence. "Ridgeton's another 100 miles south," she said. "You're going to pass through Dunmore and Halston before you get there. Dunmore's gone. Don't even slow down. Halston, I don't know. Last we heard they were holding. But that was yesterday morning, and yesterday morning was a different world." "How long have you been out here?" I asked. "Since last night. Carl organized it after his brother came back from Millfield. Said he saw things that don't fit inside normal language." She paused, adjusted her rifle strap. "Personally, I think we're wasting time playing checkpoint. But Carl's got the trucks, and Carl's got the guns. So here we are." "What would you do instead?" She looked at me with something that might have been respect for asking. "Move south. Find the staging area you're heading to. Staying static is death. That's what the infection exploits. People who hunker down, people who wait. It finds them." "You think it's intelligent?" "I think it doesn't need to be intelligent. It just needs to be relentless. Same as a flood. A flood doesn't think, but it finds every crack." I was through the blockade now. Nina dropped her hand from my door frame and stepped back. In my mirror, I watched her turn back toward the barricade where Carl was already repositioning the truck, sealing the gap I'd passed through. She looked small against the gray sky, standing between a man who wanted walls and a road that led somewhere uncertain. I accelerated back to highway speed. The sun was breaking the horizon now, painting the clouds in shades of copper and ash. My truck's shadow stretched long behind me, chasing the dawn east while I pushed west and south toward Ridgeton. The fuel gauge read 3/4, enough to get there without stopping as long as the road stayed clear. It didn't stay clear. Dunmore appeared at mile marker 156, just as Nina had warned. The town sat low in a valley, its buildings visible from the elevated interstate like pieces on a game board. Even from a 1/4 mile away, I could see it was wrong. Smoke rose from 3 separate points, not the thick black of structure fires, but thin gray columns that suggested something had burned out hours ago and was now just exhaling its last breath. Cars clogged the off-ramp, packed so tight they'd created their own barrier. People had tried to leave Dunmore and gotten stuck trying, but it was the figures on the overpass that made me push my speed to 90. There were maybe 20 of them, clustered at the railing above the interstate. They weren't moving with purpose. They swayed, shifted, bumped into each other like cattle in a pen. But when my engine noise reached them, their heads turned in unison. 20 faces, all watching my truck approach with that same empty focus I'd seen in the woman by the bridge. Their bodies pressed against the railing, arms reaching down toward the road below, as if gravity were just a suggestion they hadn't yet accepted. I passed under them at 93 miles per hour. Something hit my roof. A sound like a watermelon dropping from height. Then another impact, lighter to my right. I didn't look in my mirrors. I kept my eyes forward and my foot heavy and counted my heartbeats until they slowed from hammering to merely racing. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because instinct overrode judgment. "Is this the Hargrove truck?" A man's voice. Young, breathless. "Who is this?" "My name is Sergeant Cole Whitman, National Guard." We've been monitoring commercial frequencies. Are you carrying medical cargo designation HV7? I don't know the designation. I've got medical supplies for Ridgeton. Including sealed biohazard crates? Yes. Listen to me carefully. Ridgeton staging area has been overrun. Do not proceed to your original destination. I'm going to give you new coordinates. The road ahead stretched empty and infinite, and everything I thought I knew about this run dissolved like fog in rising heat. Sergeant Whitman spoke in clipped, precise sentences that carried the cadence of a man reading from a script while the building burned around him. The new destination was a place called Kellerman Airfield, a decommissioned military strip 40 miles west of Ridgeton, accessible via Route 9 off the interstate. He said there was a convoy assembling there, a last organized extraction effort that would take the medical cargo to a secure research facility further south. He said they had helicopters. He said there were still places where the infrastructure held. How do I know your guard? I asked. You don't. But you've got a truck full of experimental antivirals heading to a staging area that no longer exists. And I'm offering you a destination that does. The math isn't complicated. He had a point. But trust wasn't something I could afford to spend freely, not anymore. Not in a world where the dead stood on overpasses reaching for the living. Give me the coordinates. I'll decide when I reach the exit. He gave them. I wrote them on the back of my delivery manifest with a pen I found wedged between the seats. Then he said something that stuck to me like a burr. Creed, there are other vehicles on this highway heading south. Survivors who heard Ridgeton was a safe zone before it fell. They don't know yet. If you encounter them, you might consider sharing what I've told you. I'm a truck driver, Sergeant, not a shepherd. Right now, you're the only person on this road with both a destination and a reason to reach it. That makes you a shepherd whether you want the job or not. He disconnected. I drove in silence for 8 miles, processing. Ridgeton was gone. The plan was gone. But the cargo was still real, still loaded behind me, still potentially the difference between this infection spreading until there was nothing left to spread to, or being stopped somewhere, somehow, by someone in a lab coat with steady hands. At mile marker 171, I found the first survivors Whitman had mentioned. A gray minivan was pulled to the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking in the morning sun. A man stood beside it, waving both arms overhead in the universal language of desperation. Behind him, through the van's windows, I could see movement. Small movement. Children. I slowed. Every instinct Danny had reinforced. Don't stop. Keep moving. The cargo matters more than anything. Pushed against the simple human reality of a father standing on the side of a dead highway trying to save his kids. I pulled over 50 yards ahead and watched in my mirror. The man ran toward me, legs pumping with an urgency that suggested he'd been waiting for hours. I kept my engine running and cracked my window as he reached my cab. "Please," he said. "My van's overheating. The radiator's gone. I've got 3 kids in there. My wife. We were heading to Ridgeton." "Ridgeton's fallen," I said. The words came out flat, factual. I watched his face collapse and rebuild itself in the space of a second. A man swallowing catastrophe because his children were watching. And fathers don't break where children can see. "Where then?" he asked. "Where do we go?" "Kellerman Airfield, 40 miles west of Ridgeton. National Guard says there's an extraction there. Can you?" He looked at my truck, at the cargo area. "Can we ride with you?" I thought about the sealed crates, about experimental antivirals that might represent the last organized effort to fight this thing. About the weight of 5 additional lives balanced against the possibility of saving millions. "What's your name?" I asked. "David Okafor. My wife is Priya. Kids are Simon, Leah, and baby Marcus." He almost smiled. "Same name as you, maybe, if that's what your paperwork says." "It does," I said. I looked at the road ahead, at the van behind, at the man whose eyes held everything he was trying not to feel. "Get your family. They ride in the cab with me. It'll be tight, but it'll work." Priya Okafor climbed into the passenger seat with the baby. Little Marcus, 3 months old, sleeping through the apocalypse with the perfect indifference of infancy. David lifted Simon and Leah into the space behind the seats. The narrow sleeper compartment where I usually kept my overnight bag and a spare jacket. Simon was 7, serious-faced, clutching a tablet that had long since lost its signal. Leah was 5, holding a stuffed rabbit whose ear had been chewed to a nub. Neither child spoke. They'd learned already that the world had shifted into a register where silence was survival. David squeezed into the passenger side next to Priya, their shoulders overlapping, the cab designed for one now holding 5 plus an infant. The intimacy of their proximity made my solitary cab feel suddenly like a vessel, a refugee craft, a rolling island of body heat and human need. "Seatbelts don't fit like this," David said. "Nothing fits like this," I said. "But we're moving, and that's what matters." I pulled back onto the interstate. The minivan shrank behind us, abandoned to whatever came next. A metal shell that had carried a family through their normal life, now left to rust in the lane of a highway that might never carry traffic again. Priya spoke first, her voice low and steady, pitched to avoid waking the baby. "We left Canton at 3 this morning. The shelters were overflowing. People were turning inside them. The infection got in through a family that lied about symptoms. By the time the guards realized, 6 people in the gymnasium had already gone. We saw them pulling bodies out the back when we drove past." "How fast does it turn?" I asked. I'd heard different numbers from different sources. Hours, minutes. It seemed to depend on the bite location, the viral load, factors nobody had fully mapped yet. The man we saw go, our neighbor, Patrick, he was bitten at maybe 8 in the evening. By midnight, he wasn't Patrick anymore. 4 hours. She looked out the window. But the ones who get scratched, who get the blood in their eyes or mouths, they take longer, a day maybe. And during that day, they look fine. They talk, they walk, they make plans. But something behind their eyes is already gone. "How do you know that?" I asked. "Because Patrick's wife was scratched trying to pull him away. She came to the shelter with us. She seemed fine for 12 hours. Helped organize the cots, distributed water. Then at 2 in the morning, she walked into the family section and..." Priya stopped. Her jaw tightened. "That's when we left." David put his hand on her knee. A simple gesture that contained an entire conversation about what they'd seen and what they'd chosen not to say in front of the children who sat behind us, pretending to sleep. I drove. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the fog, revealing a landscape that looked deceptively normal. Fields, fences, the occasional farmhouse with smoke curling from its chimney. If you didn't know, if you'd been asleep for the past week, you might think it was just another Tuesday in the heartland. But the details betrayed the illusion. No tractors in the fields, no livestock visible, curtains drawn at every window. At mile marker 189, we passed a National Guard convoy heading north. 3 Humvees and a flatbed truck carrying something under a tarpaulin. They were moving fast, in tight formation, and didn't acknowledge my horn when I blasted it. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't rescue. "They're retreating," David said quietly, "heading back to a defensive line." "How do you know?" "I was Army. 6 years. I know what withdrawal looks like. Tight formation, no forward scouts, no communication with civilians. They've been given a fallback order." I looked at him, this man I'd known for 20 minutes, who was already rewriting my understanding of what was happening around us. "Does that change our plan?" "It means Kellerman had better be real," he said, "because whatever's behind us is winning." The exit for Route 9 appeared at mile marker 203, marked by a green sign that someone had spray-painted over with 2 words, "Dead ahead." The irony, or the warning, impossible to tell which was intended, hung in the air as I downshifted and took the off-ramp. Route 9 was a 2-lane state road that cut through agricultural land before winding into the low hills west of Ridgeton. It was narrower than the interstate, more exposed, offering less speed and fewer escape routes. Every tactical disadvantage a truck driver could catalog. "This is the road?" David asked. "This is what the sergeant gave me. And we're trusting a voice on a phone. We're trusting a direction. That's all anyone has right now." Route 9 was quiet but not empty. We passed a gas station with its pump still lit, the price signs glowing against the morning sky. A car was parked at the first pump, driver's door open, nozzle still inserted in the fuel port, but no driver visible. The transaction had been interrupted at its most mundane point. Someone had been filling their tank, and then simply ceased to exist in that context. Simon spoke for the first time, his voice small from the sleeper compartment. "Dad, is that blood on the ground?" David turned around. "Don't look outside for a while, buddy. Watch your tablet. It doesn't have signal. Then close your eyes. We'll tell you when it's safe to look." The boy went quiet. I caught Priya's eyes. She was watching me, assessing me the way you assess a pilot when turbulence hits, checking for confidence, for steadiness, for any sign that the person in control was about to lose it. I gave her nothing. 11 years of highway driving had taught me how to wear composure like a uniform. 5 miles down Route 9, the terrain changed. The flat farmland gave way to wooded hills, the road winding between walls of pine that pressed close enough to brush the truck's mirrors. Visibility dropped to whatever the next curve offered. The comfortable distance of the interstate, the ability to see threats from a mile away, was gone. "I don't like this," David said. "Neither do I. If something blocks this road, we can't turn around. Not in a truck this size." "I know. So, what's the plan if—" "Push through. This truck weighs 18 tons loaded. Most obstacles aren't designed to stop 18 tons. He nodded. Military pragmatism recognized the logic. Priya held baby Marcus closer. We came around a curve and found the answer to David's hypothetical. A logging truck had jackknifed across both lanes, its trailer still loaded with raw timber, creating a wall of wood and steel that my 18 tons couldn't solve. The truck's cab was crushed against a rock face on the left. The trailer's end butted against the tree line on the right. Complete blockage. I stopped 50 yards back and killed my engine. The silence was immediate and absolute. No birds, no wind, no ambient sound of civilization. Just the tick of my cooling engine and the baby's breathing. "Options," David said. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. The soldier in him required information before he could produce a plan. I saw a fire road about half a mile back, unpaved, narrow. Might connect to Route 9 further ahead, might dead end in the woods. "Or we move the timber," Priya said. Both David and I looked at her. The chains holding the load. If we release them, the logs roll off. Clear enough space for the truck to squeeze past. That requires getting out, I said. Yes. In territory we haven't cleared. Yes. She met my eyes with absolute steadiness. But sitting here isn't surviving. It's waiting. She was right. The road didn't care about our comfort. It only respected movement. And movement required risk. I looked at the blockade, at the trees pressing close on either side, at the shadows between the trunks where anything could be standing, watching, waiting for us to step outside our metal shell. David and I go, I said. You stay with the kids, engine running. If anything comes from those trees, you drive. Even if we're not back yet, you drive. David found a tire iron in the truck's external compartment. I took a heavy flashlight. Metal body, 6 D cells. Enough weight to serve as a club if it came to that. We walked toward the jackknifed logging truck in silence, scanning the tree line with the hyper-awareness of prey animals crossing open ground. The morning sun slanted through the pines at a low angle, casting long shadows that shifted with every breath of wind, making each one a potential threat until your eyes adjusted and confirmed it was just a tree being a tree. The logging truck's cab told a story I didn't want to read too closely. The windshield was shattered inward, not from the crash, but from something that had come through it after the truck stopped. The driver's seat was empty, but stained in a way that suggested its occupant had left involuntarily. A trucker's hat sat on the dashboard, logo forward, placed there by a man who expected to pick it up again. Focus on the chains, David said. He'd already moved to the trailer, assessing the load securing system with practiced efficiency. There are 4 main chains and 2 backup straps. If we release the chains on the downhill side, gravity does the work. The logs roll off to the right toward the tree line, creates a gap on the left between the cab and the remaining load. Will it be wide enough? For your truck, barely. You'll lose a mirror. Mirrors are replaceable. We worked the first chain together. The release mechanism was a ratchet binder, standard freight equipment I'd used 1,000 times in normal circumstances. But my hands were shaking in a way they never did when the cargo was lumber destined for a hardware store and the biggest risk was a DOT inspection. David held the chain steady while I cranked the binder loose. The chain fell away with a metallic crash that echoed through the trees like a dinner bell. We both froze, listened. Nothing moved in the shadows. No response to the sound. After 10 seconds, David nodded and we moved to the second chain. You said you were Army, I said, keeping my voice low. What did you do? Combat engineer. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Spent most of my time building things that could survive explosions and disassembling things that were designed to explode. He paused, working the second binder. Never thought I'd be using those skills to clear a road in my own country. What made you get out? Priya was pregnant with Simon. I looked at myself in the mirror and asked whether I wanted to be the father who was always gone or the father who was always there. Chose there. The second chain dropped. Now I'm wondering if I made the wrong call. The skills I let rust, I need them all now. You haven't lost them, I said. You identified that guard convoy's behavior in 2 seconds. You assessed this blockade like you were reading a manual. The skills aren't rusty. You just hadn't needed them. He looked at me for a moment. A look I recognized from drivers I'd worked with for years, the look of sudden reassessment, of revising someone's importance upward. Third chain, he said. We released the third chain and the logs shifted. A deep groaning sound, wood against wood, and then 3 massive timber sections rolled off the trailer's right side, crashing into the undergrowth with a sound like thunder. The impact shook the ground. Birds exploded from the canopy, the first living things we'd heard since stopping. Their presence was oddly reassuring. Birds meant the immediate area was clear. Infected presence scattered wildlife. The gap was visible now. Tight, ugly, requiring precision driving, but passable. One more chain, and it would be comfortable. Last one's on top, David said. I need to climb. Wait. I held up my hand. Something had changed. The birds had gone silent again. Not the gradual silence of resettling, but the immediate, total silence of new alarm. I turned toward the tree line on our left, the uphill side, and saw movement between the trunks. 3 figures, moving downhill, not running, but not walking either. That terrible in-between gait, purposeful but wrong, like marionettes operated by someone who'd only read a description of walking. David, I see them? We had seconds, not minutes. The figures were 60 yards out, moving through the trees with that horrible stumbling efficiency. Feet catching on roots, bodies correcting without slowing, heads fixed forward on us like locked targeting systems. I could see enough to know they'd been people recently. One wore work clothes, heavy canvas jacket, steel-toed boots. Another had a flannel shirt torn open, exposing a chest mottled with something dark that wasn't shadow. The third was smaller. I didn't look at the third one long enough to catalog details. The chain, David said. We need that last chain off or it's not wide enough. Forget the chain. We squeeze through what we've got. Your truck won't. It will. Move. We ran. Not the controlled, tactical movement David's training preferred, but the full sprint panic of men who understood that 60 yards of tree cover was the only thing between those figures and our skin. My boots hit the asphalt with sounds that felt obscenely loud. David matched my pace, tire iron gripped in his right hand, his breathing controlled even at full speed. Trained lungs that remembered how to work under pressure. I reached the truck first. Priya had seen the figures. Her face was pressed to the windshield, eyes wide, hand already on the gear shift. I yanked open the driver's door and hauled myself in. Go, David said, pulling his door closed behind him. Go now. The engine was still running. Priya hadn't killed it. I blessed her instincts, dropped into first, and released the clutch with enough force to chirp the tires on an 18-ton vehicle. The truck lurched forward, accelerating toward the gap between the logging truck's cab and the remaining timber load. It's not wide enough, Priya said. It's wide enough for the truck, not for the mirrors. I aimed for center gap and committed. There was no room for hesitation. Hesitation meant stopping. And stopping meant those 3 figures reaching us. The truck's left mirror struck the logging truck's rear corner and exploded inward, showering the driver's window with plastic fragments. The right mirror caught a protruding log and bent backward with a metallic shriek. The truck's body groaned as sheet metal scraped against timber, but momentum carried us through. The sound was terrible. Metal on wood on metal. But the truck didn't stop. We cleared the blockade, and I accelerated hard, engine roaring through the gears. In the remaining mirror, the right one, bent but functional, I could see the 3 figures emerging from the tree line onto the road behind us. They reached the spot where we'd been working seconds ago and stopped. They didn't pursue. At that distance, in that broken mirror, they looked almost like people just standing on a road. Almost normal, almost harmless. They're not following, David said. They don't need to. They know we have to keep using roads. They'll be at the next blockade, or the one after that. You think they're strategic? I think they go where sound is. We made a lot of sound dropping those chains. Every infected within a mile heard us. Baby Marcus was crying now. The sudden acceleration had jolted him from sleep. Priya murmured to him in a low tone that somehow cut through the engine noise. Leah had her face buried in her stuffed rabbit. Simon was watching out the rear window with an expression no 7-year-old should wear. Calculating, measuring, already learning the geometry of threat assessment. "How far to Kellerman?" David asked. 30 miles on this road. Maybe less if it connects back to a wider route. And if there are more blockades? Then we solve them, like we solved this one. He nodded. But something had shifted between us in those 60 seconds of shared danger, a bond formed not from words or history, but from the simple chemistry of surviving together. We were no longer a truck driver and a passenger. We were a unit. And the road ahead, whatever it held, would have to deal with both of us. Route 9 opened up after 2 miles, the pine corridor giving way to a river valley that ran parallel to the road. The water was low, late summer levels, exposing banks of smooth stone that caught the sunlight in ways that made the world look temporarily beautiful. Deceptive beauty. The kind that makes you forget what's hunting you if you let it. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Creed, this is Nina from the checkpoint. Carl's dead, taking survivors south. Route 9 accessible?" I stared at the message. Nina, the woman with the deer rifle who'd let me through, who'd argued against static defense, who'd been right about everything. Carl was dead. The checkpoint was gone. The flood had found its crack. I typed back. "Route 9 passable but has blockades. Jackknifed logging truck at mile 8, we cleared a gap. Headed to Kellerman Airfield." Her response came fast. "How many vehicles?" "Just my truck. 5 passengers, including 3 kids." "I have 11 people in 4 vehicles. We're 20 minutes behind you. Can we convoy?" I looked at David. He'd read the messages over my shoulder. Cab was too small for privacy. "Strength in numbers," he said. "Especially if she's armed." "She is." "Then yes." I replied, "Affirmative. We'll slow our pace. Fall in behind when you catch us." The idea of a convoy changed the calculation. 1 truck was a target. 5 vehicles were a column. Something that implied organized force. Something that might make threats think twice. Whether the infected could think in those terms was an open question. But the living threats, the Carls of the world, the desperate and the territorial, would see a convoy differently than a lone semi. "Who's Nina?" Priya asked. "Someone who chose movement over walls." She was right about that choice. "And Carl? Someone who chose walls." He was wrong. Priya absorbed this with the quiet efficiency of a woman building a mental model of the new world's rules. Movement over stasis. Action over defense. The offensive philosophy of survival in an environment where the threat didn't sleep, didn't tire, didn't negotiate. 7 miles past the logging truck blockade, Route 9 intersected a county road. At the intersection, a gas station and a feed store sat on opposite corners like sentinels of the rural economy. Both appeared intact. Windows unbroken, doors closed, no visible damage. But the gas station's convenience store had its interior lights flickering in a pattern that suggested electrical damage. And the feed store's loading dock had its roll-up door open, revealing darkness inside that could have been empty or could have been occupied. "We need fuel," I said. My gauge had dropped to half, enough to reach Kellerman, maybe, if the road stayed clear. But maybe was a word that killed people in situations like this. "Risk assessment," David said. gas station or keep rolling. If we run dry 10 miles from Kellerman, we're walking with 3 children and an infant through territory we can't clear. If we stop and get surrounded, we're dead in a parking lot. 30 seconds, I said. I pull up, you pump. Priya keeps the engine ready. In and out. You trust the pumps still work? The lights are on. Power's flowing. Cards probably won't process, but I've got a fleet fuel card that authorizes at the pump level. It should work. David looked at the station, at the dark spaces between the building and the tree line, at the angles of approach a threat could use. His combat engineer brain was mapping kill zones and escape routes, overlaying military geometry onto a gas station in rural America. Pull up to pump 1, closest to the road. I pump, you watch east, Priya watches west. If anything moves that shouldn't, we leave without the hose. Fuel on the ground, burning pumps. That's their problem, not ours. Agreed. I swung the truck off Route 9 and into the gas station lot. Gravel crunched under my tires, too loud, always too loud in a world where sound was a beacon. I positioned at pump 1, nose pointed toward the exit. David was out before I'd fully stopped, fleet card in hand, moving with military precision toward the pump interface. 23 seconds. That's how long we had before the feed store's loading dock disgorged its contents. They came out of the feed store's darkness like water from a broken pipe, not a rush, but a steady pour. 6 of them, stumbling over the loading dock's lip, falling the 4-foot drop to the pavement and rising without acknowledging the impact. Their coordination was non-existent, but their direction was unified. Toward the sound of my diesel engine, toward the movement of David at the pump, toward the warmth and noise of living things doing living things. "David," I shouted through my open window. He'd already seen them. The pump was running. I could hear the mechanical whir of the fuel flowing. And he made the decision I'd have made. He didn't pull the nozzle. He wedged it into the truck's fuel port, letting the automatic shutoff hold it in place, and jumped for the cab. The pump continued filling while he climbed in, pulling his door shut with the controlled urgency of a man who understood that panic costs seconds. "Drive," he said. "The pump will kick off or the hose will break. Either way, we leave." I hit the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, and the fuel hose stretched, reached its limit, and the nozzle ripped free from my tank with a metallic clang. Diesel sprayed across my truck's side, not much, maybe a gallon, but the pump handle clattered to the ground, still flowing. A river of fuel spreading across the concrete toward the 6 figures now crossing the parking lot. "How much did we get?" I asked. David checked the gauge. "Moved from half to maybe 5/8, 10 extra gallons. Enough." I pulled back onto Route 9 without looking back. The infected in the parking lot were 30 yards behind and falling further with every second of acceleration. In my bent mirror, I saw them reach the diesel puddle and walk through it without recognition, their bare feet or work boots splashing through fuel with the same indifference they showed to gravity, temperature, pain. Priya was breathing fast. The baby was screaming. Simon had his hands over Leah's eyes. These were the mechanics of survival with children. Constant triage of their exposure, constant management of their fear, all while your own terror demanded attention you couldn't afford to give it. "We're clear," I said. For now, the unspoken addition that everyone heard anyway. 10 minutes later, Nina's convoy appeared in my remaining mirror. 4 vehicles in tight formation, a pickup truck, 2 sedans, and an SUV. They accelerated to match my pace, filling the road behind me with the comforting presence of Allied movement. My phone buzzed. "Nina here. We see you. Forming up behind." What's the road look like ahead? Clear since the gas station. We had contact there, 6 infected at a feed store, otherwise quiet. Copy. We'll maintain 50-yard spacing. Flash your brakes if you need to stop. The convoy felt different from solo driving. There was weight behind me now, not just tonnage, but responsibility. 11 more people trusting the direction I was heading, following a truck driver they'd met for 2 minutes at a roadside checkpoint. The absurdity of it would have made me laugh in any other circumstance. In this one, it just made me grip the wheel tighter. Route 9 began its descent from the hills, the terrain flattening as we approached the valley, where Kellerman Airfield should be. The road straightened, offering sight lines that extended a mile or more. I could see buildings in the distance, low structures, military geometries, flat roofs designed for function rather than aesthetics. A water tower with Kellerman painted on its side in faded letters. There, David said. That's it. Looks intact. Looks quiet. Quiet good or quiet bad? He squinted through the windshield. I can't tell from here, but there's no smoke, no vehicle damage visible, no obvious breach of perimeter. If Whitman was telling the truth, this might actually be real. For the first time in hours, I felt something that wasn't fear or calculation. It was fragile and dangerous, and I didn't trust it. But it was there. Hope. The possibility that the road had a destination. That the cargo in my truck would reach hands that could use it. That these people behind me, Nina's 11, David's family, would find something at the end of this drive other than more running. Kellerman Airfield's perimeter fence appeared a half-mile from the main buildings, 12 feet of chain link topped with concertina wire, the kind of security that said government, even in decay. The fence was intact. More importantly, it showed signs of recent maintenance. New razor wire added in sections, sandbags stacked at intervals, and a gate across Route 9 that was clearly operational rather than ornamental. 2 vehicles were parked inside the gate. Military Humvees, one with a mounted spotlight that tracked our approach. A figure stepped out from behind the gatehouse, wearing fatigues and holding a clipboard. The normalcy of the clipboard, someone was still keeping records, still maintaining bureaucratic order, felt almost surreal after the chaos of the road. I slowed to a stop 20 yards from the gate. Nina's convoy lined up behind me, engines idling, a queue of refugees at the door of whatever this place was about to be. The soldier approached my window. Young, maybe 22, with a face that tried for authority but couldn't fully hide the exhaustion underneath. His name tape read, Walsh. Identification and cargo manifest, he said. Rehearsed, procedural. I handed him my driver's license and the Hargrove delivery paperwork. Sergeant Whitman directed me here. I've got medical supplies designated. HV7, yes. We've been expecting you. Walsh's professionalism cracked slightly, a flash of relief crossing his features before he reassembled them. You're 6 hours behind projected arrival. We were beginning to think you'd been lost. I wasn't lost. The road was complicated. He looked past my truck at the convoy. These with you? They are. How many total? 16 people, including my truck. 3 children, 1 infant. Walsh wrote on his clipboard, the scratch of pen on paper. A sound from the old world that had somehow survived into this one. Pull forward through the gate. Follow the road to Building 7. Big gray hangar on the left. Medical team will meet you for the cargo transfer. Your passengers will be directed to processing in Building 3. Processing? Standard intake. Health screening, decontamination protocol, assignment of quarters. Everyone who comes through that gate gets processed. Non-negotiable. The gate opened. I pulled through, watching in my mirror as Nina's vehicles followed. The convoy passed through the fence line, and I heard the gate close behind us. Chain on metal, the sound of perimeter restored. Inside was different from outside in a way that went beyond the physical barrier. Inside, there were people walking between buildings with purpose rather than panic. A generator hummed somewhere. The smell of cooking food drifted from a structure to my right. Civilization, even in miniature, even fragile, still functioning. Building 7 was an aircraft hangar. Cold War era, corrugated steel, its doors partially open, revealing a cavernous interior lit by industrial fixtures. 3 people waited outside. 2 soldiers and a woman in civilian clothes, wearing a lab coat over jeans. She was already moving toward my truck before I'd fully stopped, her eyes on the cargo area, with an intensity that told me she knew exactly what was in those sealed crates. "Marcus Creed?" she asked as I stepped down from the cab. "That's me. Dr. Elaine Vasquez. I'm leading the research team here. Your cargo?" She looked at my truck like it was carrying oxygen to a drowning world. "We've been waiting for this since Ridgeton fell. We thought it was gone. Almost was, several times. I need access to the sealed crates immediately. The antivirals have a temperature-sensitive window. If they've been without climate control for more than 12 hours, potency degrades. They've been in my truck since 5:30 this morning, 7 hours. Then we have time, but not much." She turned to the soldiers. "Begin offload. Priority on the biohazard-designated containers. Everything else can wait." I watched them open my truck's cargo doors, the familiar sight of stacked medical supplies, boxes I'd loaded in the dark that morning, in a world that already felt like a different lifetime, being carried into a building where they might actually matter. Where the sealed crates and their experimental contents might become something more than just weight in my trailer. David appeared beside me, his family gathered close. "We made it," he said. "We made it here," I corrected. "Here isn't the end. It's just the next part." Processing in Building 3 was efficient and impersonal. The bureaucracy of survival reduced to its essential forms. Health screening meant temperature checks, visual inspection for bite marks or scratches, a questionnaire about exposure history. Decontamination meant a chemical shower that stung the eyes and left skin feeling raw. Assignment of quarters meant a cot in a repurposed office space, separated from other refugees by hanging sheets that provided the illusion of privacy without its substance. I was assigned to a room with David. Priya and the children got a separate space. Family priority, Walsh explained without elaboration. Nina and her group were distributed across 3 rooms. Their 4 vehicles parked in a designated motor pool that held maybe 20 cars in various conditions. The population of Kellerman, as far as I could estimate, was around 200, a mix of military personnel, civilian specialists like Dr. Vasquez, and refugees who'd arrived before us through various channels. After processing, I found Nina in what passed for a common area. A break room in Building 3 with vending machines that no longer vended and plastic chairs arranged in circles that suggested group therapy or briefings, depending on the day. She looked different without the backdrop of a highway. Smaller, maybe, or just more human. Less the armed figure by the roadside and more a woman in her early 30s with dark circles under her eyes and a rifle she'd propped against the wall like it was an umbrella she hoped she wouldn't need again. "Carl," I said, sitting across from her. Not a question, an opening. "He wouldn't leave the checkpoint," she said. When we saw them coming, maybe 30, 40, walking down the highway from the north like a parade. He said the trucks would hold. I said nothing holds against those numbers. He said I was a coward. She looked at her hands. I took 11 people and left. Carl and 3 others stayed to defend a barricade made of pickup trucks against a force that doesn't understand barriers. I heard the screaming in my rearview mirror for maybe a minute before distance ate it. You made the right call. I know. That's not the same as feeling right about it. She met my eyes. At the checkpoint, you were just cargo passing through. Now you're the man who led us here. That means something to the people in my group. They'll follow your direction. I'm a truck driver, Nina. You were a truck driver. Now you're the person who knows how to move through a world that punishes stillness. That's a different profession. I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. Roles had been reassigned by circumstance. And resisting the new title didn't change the expectations it carried. The people who'd followed my truck down Route 9 had placed their survival in proximity to mine. That proximity was trust, and trust was obligation, whether I'd signed up for it or not. A speaker in the ceiling crackled. Walsh's voice. All new arrivals. Briefing in the hangar at 1400. Attendance mandatory. Nina checked her watch. A digital model that still worked. Still counted the hours of a day that now felt measured in entirely different units than before. That's 20 minutes. You going? Everyone's going. Mandatory means they have something to tell us. And the only thing they'd make mandatory is something they think we won't like. She was right about that, too. In my experience, limited as it was to the organizational dynamics of trucking companies, mandatory meetings happened when management needed to deliver bad news face-to-face, because written communication would cause panic. The face-to-face format was about control, about managing the reaction in real time. I stood, stretched muscles that had been clenched for 8 hours of driving, and followed Nina toward Building 7. The afternoon sun was high and warm, making the airfield look almost peaceful. A summer day at an old military base, the kind of place that might host an air show or a farmer's market in the world that used to be. But the concertina wire on the fence caught the light in ways that kept catching my eye, reminding me that peace was just a costume this place was wearing. Underneath was something sharper. The hangar was configured for briefing, folding chairs in rows facing a portable podium where a projector threw pale rectangles of light onto the corrugated wall. Maybe 150 people filled the seats, with another 50 standing along the sides. The room smelled of diesel fuel and anxious bodies. Dr. Vasquez stood beside the podium. Sergeant Whitman, the voice from my phone, now a face. Mid-40s, lean, with a scar on his jaw that predated the current crisis, took the podium with the controlled energy of a man about to drop a bomb and call it information. Thank you all for being here, he began, unnecessary politeness that served as a buffer. I'll be direct. The extraction convoy that was scheduled for tomorrow morning has been canceled. The room didn't explode. It contracted. A collective intake of breath, a tightening of shoulders, the sound of 200 people simultaneously swallowing their expectations. The southern corridor is no longer accessible, Whitman continued. As of 6 hours ago, the infection has established presence across a 70-mile band between us and the next secure installation. Helicopter extraction remains theoretically possible, but has been deprioritized by regional command in favor of larger population centers. We are not being abandoned, but we are being delayed. Indefinitely. Nina was beside me. Her jaw set, her eyes not on Whitman but on the crowd, reading reactions, measuring the temperature of the room the way you'd watch a gauge approaching red line. What does that mean for us? Someone shouted from the back. It means Kellerman is now a holding position rather than a transit point. We have supplies for approximately 3 weeks at current population. Fuel for generators will last slightly longer. The perimeter fence is sound, and we have enough personnel to maintain watch rotation. We are not in immediate danger. 3 weeks isn't a plan, David said. Not shouting. His voice carried the calm authority of a man who'd been in briefings where bad news was delivered with professionalism. What happens at week 4? Whitman looked at him, recognized a fellow soldier. At week 4, we implement rationing protocols that extend our supplies to 6 weeks. During that time, we pursue alternative extraction routes and attempt to establish contact with other secure positions. And if no extraction comes, then we adapt. This base has agricultural potential, water access, arable land within the perimeter. Long-term sustainability is being assessed. The room erupted. Not violence, argument. Voices overlapping, the particular sound of desperate people discovering that their temporary refuge might become permanent. Some demanded immediate departure. They'd take their chances on the road. Others argued for patience, for trusting military structure, for waiting. The split was instant and tribal, forming along lines of temperament rather than logic. Dr. Vasquez stepped forward. "The antivirals," she said, and the room quieted. Her voice carried the weight of someone who held answers. "The cargo that arrived today contains experimental antivirals that show promise in early trials. We have a functional lab here. If these compounds work as theorized, we can develop a treatment protocol that fundamentally changes the equation. But I need time. I need stability. I need this base to remain intact and functional while we work." She was bargaining, offering hope as currency to purchase cooperation. It worked on some faces and failed on others. Nina's expression was unreadable. David's was calculating. Priya, standing near the back with baby Marcus, looked like a woman weighing her children's futures on a scale that only she could see. "How long?" someone asked. "How long for the antivirals?" "Days to confirm viability, weeks to produce enough for widespread use, months to distribute beyond this facility." Vasquez was honest in a way that either built trust or destroyed it, depending on the listener. But if it works, this isn't just survival anymore. It's the beginning of reclamation. I stood in that hangar listening to the future being negotiated between fear and science, between the impulse to run and the argument for standing still. And I realized that the road, my domain, my identity, the thing that had carried me and everyone behind me to this point, was now the enemy. The road led out, and out led to death. Staying meant trusting people I didn't know with a timeline I couldn't verify. The road had saved us. Now it might kill us. The briefing dissolved into clusters of argument that spread across the hangar like separate fires. I found David outside, leaning against the building's steel wall, watching the perimeter fence as if expecting it to provide answers. "You're thinking about leaving," I said. "I'm thinking about my children." His voice was flat, not angry, processing. 3 weeks of guaranteed safety versus an open road of guaranteed danger. 6 weeks if we ration. Vasquez's timeline means months before those antivirals help anyone. My kids are 3 months old, 5 and 7. They can't survive on promises. They survived the road because we moved. But the road's different now. Whitman says 70 miles of infected between here and anywhere else. Whitman says a lot of things from behind a podium. I spent 6 years in the Army. I know what institutional communication looks like when the institution is failing. They don't tell you the building's collapsing. They tell you the structural assessment is ongoing. He wasn't wrong. I'd seen the same pattern in corporate logistics. The careful language of organizations managing their own decline while demanding faith from those inside, but disagreeing with the institution, didn't automatically make the alternative better. What does Priya think? Priya thinks we stay. She trusts Vasquez. She says a doctor with a lab is worth more than a highway with no destination. He paused. She's probably right. But my job is to plan for her being wrong. I understood. David was building contingencies, not because he wanted to leave, but because responsible people prepare exits even while they commit to staying. The question was whether his preparation would remain contingency or become action. Nina approached us, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her expression carrying the particular tension of a leader whose followers are looking to her for direction she hasn't decided on yet. My group wants a vote, she said. Stay or go. Democratic survival. Democracy assumes informed voters, David said. What do they actually know about what's out there? They know what they drove through to get here. That should be enough. It's not the same. Coming here, they had a destination. Leaving means driving into unknown territory with no confirmed safe zone at the end. The psychology is completely different. Nina looked at me. What about you, Creed? Stay or go? The question landed with weight I didn't expect. 24 hours ago, I was a truck driver following a GPS. Now 2 groups of survivors were asking me to weigh in on their collective future. The responsibility felt like cargo, something I could carry but hadn't asked to load. I'm staying, I said. For now, the antivirals need this base. If they work, they change everything. If I leave, the cargo I brought becomes pointless. Just boxes in a building that eventually falls. I didn't drive through what I drove through to walk away before the work's done. Nina nodded slowly. That's not a bad reason. She turned to David. And you? Staying. But I want involvement in perimeter security. I want access to maps, communication equipment, and escape route planning. If this place starts to fall, I won't be in a briefing room hearing about it after the fact. Whitman won't give us civilian access to military. Then Whitman and I need to have a conversation about the distinction between military and civilian in a world where that distinction has stopped meaning what it used to mean. Nina almost smiled. I'll back that conversation. My group includes 2 former police officers and a woman who managed logistics for FEMA before this started. Whitman can either integrate us or watch his command structure compete with the one we build independently. There it was. The first seed of organizational tension. Not mutiny, not yet. But the beginning of parallel authority. Whitman ran Kellerman by military rank. Nina and David were building something beside it. Civilian competence demanding a seat at the table. The question was whether Whitman would welcome it or resist it. Either answer would reshape what Kellerman was about to become. The first 3 days at Kellerman established a rhythm that almost felt like normalcy. Morning roll calls, meal distribution, work assignments, fence maintenance, guard rotation, sanitation, logistics. Children appeared in the common area, their laughter occasionally piercing the operational quiet in ways that made adults stop and listen with expressions that mixed comfort and grief. Leah and Simon joined 4 other children in what someone optimistically called a school group. A daily 2-hour session in Building 5 where a former teacher named Rachel tried to maintain educational structure in a world where the curriculum had become irrelevant. I found my place in the logistics chain. Kellerman had vehicles but limited qualified drivers for anything larger than an SUV. My CDL made me valuable in a specific, practical way. When supply runs to nearby abandoned stores became necessary, I drove. Short runs, always within 5 miles of the perimeter, always with armed escort, always timed to minimize exposure. The first run happened on day 2. Whitman authorized a team of 4, myself driving a military transport truck, David riding shotgun with an actual shotgun, and 2 soldiers in the back. Our target was a hardware store 2 miles east that had been scouted from the air and confirmed empties of infected presence. We drove in formation, Humvee leading, my truck following, second Humvee trailing. The road was familiar terrain for me, and the short distance made the operation feel almost routine. Almost. The hardware store was intact, its inventory untouched. We loaded lumber, nails, fuel containers, rope, batteries, and hand tools. The entire operation took 40 minutes. No contacts, no incidents. But on the return trip, passing through a residential area that bordered the airfield's eastern fence, I saw something that stayed with me longer than any infected encounter. A house with its front door open, curtains blowing in the breeze, a sprinkler system running on the front lawn, automated, timer-activated, watering grass for people who would never mow it again. The normalcy of it, the pure mechanical continuation of domestic routine in the absence of the domestic, felt like watching a heartbeat after death. The body going through motions that no longer meant anything. "Eyes forward, Creed," David said. "I'm fine. You're staring at that house like it owes you something. It reminds me of mine, back in Caulfield. Don't go there, not yet. There'll be time for that later." He was right, and I knew it. But the image of that sprinkler, faithful, purposeless, endlessly repeating its small duty, lodged in me like a splinter. My house in Caulfield had a sprinkler system on a timer. It was probably running too, watering the lawn of a house whose owner was 240 miles away, carried out to neighboring strangers through a dying world. Back at Kellerman, Dr. Vasquez called a small meeting, just her, Whitman, Nina, David, and me. We gathered in her lab, which occupied a corner of Building 7's hangar space, partitioned by plastic sheeting into something resembling a workspace. Microscopes, centrifuges, vials, and computers covered every surface. 2 assistants moved between stations with the focused energy of people racing a deadline only they could see. "The antivirals are viable," Vasquez announced. Her voice carried suppressed excitement, the controlled elation of a scientist whose hypothesis has cleared its first hurdle. Initial testing on tissue samples shows significant inhibition of viral replication. We're not at cure stage. This isn't going to reverse an existing infection. But administered within the first hour of exposure, it has a strong probability of preventing progression. 1 hour, Nina said. That's a very small window. It's a window that didn't exist yesterday. And as we refine the compound, that window may expand. "What do you need from us?" Whitman asked. "Time, security, and eventually, test subjects." She paused. "We have volunteers, soldiers who've accepted the risk. But I want to be transparent with everyone in this room about what that means. We'll be deliberately exposing people to the virus and then administering the antiviral. If it fails, those volunteers turn, in this building, among us." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of moral weight that pressed against the walls. The volunteer trials began on day 5. 3 soldiers, young, steady-eyed, having signed consent forms that Vasquez had drawn up with the peculiar formality of a legal system that no longer technically existed. They were quarantined in a converted storage room within the lab area, observed through reinforced plexiglass that someone had salvaged from a bank teller's window. The infection would be administered via controlled scratch, minimum viral load, immediate antiviral injection, constant monitoring. I watched the first administration through the plexiglass. Private Ryan Kowalski, 23, from somewhere in Michigan. He sat on a metal chair, left arm extended, while Vasquez's assistant made a shallow incision and applied infected tissue to the wound. Then Vasquez injected the antiviral directly into the same arm, above the exposure site. Kowalski's face was a masterpiece of enforced calm, the look of a soldier who'd volunteered for something terrifying and now had to live inside that decision. 12 hours, Vasquez said. If the antiviral is working, he'll show no progression symptoms by 12 hours. Normal progression at this viral load would show within 4. We waited. The base waited. Everyone knew what was happening in that room, and the collective attention of 200 people focused on a single storage closet with the intensity of a species watching its own survival being tested. At hour 4, Kowalski reported feeling warm, slight headache. Vasquez noted it without visible alarm. Immune response, she said. Expected. The body fighting the virus is indistinguishable from early progression in symptoms alone. We watch and wait. At hour 8, Kowalski was pacing. The warmth had become fever, measured at 102, then 103. His headache had intensified, but his eyes were clear, his speech coherent, his responses to cognitive tests perfect. He was fighting. At hour 12, his fever broke, temperature dropping back to normal range. Cognitive function intact, pupil response normal, no signs of aggression, no neurological deterioration, no loss of higher function. Vasquez checked and rechecked, her hands trembling slightly, not with fear but with the overwhelming relief of confirmation. It works, she said to our small group gathered outside the plexiglass. At this dosage, at this exposure level, it works. The second and third volunteers received their trials over the next 2 days. Both successful. 3 for 3. The antiviral wasn't perfect. It required immediate administration. It didn't reverse existing infection, and production at scale would be challenging. But it worked. In the narrow window it was designed for, it worked. News spread through Kellerman like water through cracks. Fast, unstoppable, transforming the ambient despair into something cautiously electric. People stood straighter. Conversations shifted from "how long do we have" to "what do we do next?" The calculus of survival expanded to include a future longer than 6 weeks. But the triumph carried a shadow. Vasquez needed more materials to scale production. Specific chemicals, equipment, biological samples that existed in facilities beyond our perimeter. Which meant supply runs. Real ones. Not the 2-mile hardware store trips, but deeper penetrations into compromised territory. Whitman laid it out in another briefing, this one smaller. Just the leadership circle that had organically formed. Himself, Vasquez, Nina, David, and me. We need supplies from the Meridian Pharmaceutical Distribution Center, he said. 28 miles northeast. It's in Halston. Halston, the town Nina had warned me about on Route 9. The one that was holding yesterday and might not be holding now. We've done aerial reconnaissance, Whitman continued. The facility appears intact. Minimal infected presence in the immediate vicinity. They've concentrated in the residential areas, not the industrial park. A fast team, in and out, could recover what Dr. Vasquez needs in under 2 hours. He looked at me. Creed, I need your truck and your driving. David, I need your tactical assessment. Nina, I need your team's shooting. This isn't military only anymore. This is everyone who can contribute. The road was calling again. After 5 days of safety, the perimeter was about to expand. And I knew, with the certainty of a man who'd lived his life in transit. That the road would test us differently this time. We left at dawn on day 6. 3 vehicles. My truck for cargo capacity, Nina's pickup with 3 of her shooters in the bed, and a Humvee with Whitman and 2 soldiers. David rode with me again. The cab had become our war room, the space where decisions happened between 2 men who'd learned to think in tandem. The route to Halston took us back onto Route 9, reversing the path we'd driven 6 days earlier. The landscape was the same but different. Familiar terrain overlaid with new information, new awareness of what the shadows between trees might contain. The logging truck blockade was where we'd left it. The gap we'd forced still passable, the logs we'd dumped still scattered in the undergrowth. "Feels like a year ago," David said as we threaded through the gap. "Feels like yesterday and a year ago at the same time." That's what compressed time does. Every day is a month. Every decision is a year's worth of consequence packed into seconds. Route 9 delivered us to Halston's outskirts by 7:30. The town was larger than I'd expected. A proper small city of maybe 15,000 pre-infection, with an industrial park on its northern edge where the pharmaceutical distribution center sat among warehouses and manufacturing facilities. Whitman's reconnaissance had been accurate. The residential core of Halston showed obvious signs of infestation. Streets clogged with abandoned vehicles, buildings with shattered windows, the general architecture of collapse. But the industrial park, separated from the town center by a 4-lane bypass road, appeared calm, empty. The infected had followed the population density, and the industrial park had no population to follow. We approached the distribution center from the north, avoiding the bypass road and its potential sightlines into the residential areas. The facility was a large concrete building, windowless, secure, designed to store pharmaceuticals at controlled temperatures. Its loading dock had 4 bays, all closed. A security gate blocked the access road, but it was a simple bar gate, not a hardened barrier. Nina's truck went first, her shooters scanning rooftops and corners as they cleared the approach. All clear. I pulled my truck to the loading dock while Whitman's Humvee took a position at the facility's entrance, facing outward, rear guard. David and I approached the building's personnel entrance. Locked, electronic keypad, dead without power. David examined it for 3 seconds, then produced a pry bar from his pack and levered the door open with a controlled violence that minimized sound. The door gave. Inside was dark, cool, and absolutely silent. We swept the facility room by room. Flashlights cutting through pharmaceutical darkness, illuminating rows of shelving stacked with labeled containers. Refrigeration units humming on backup power that had somehow survived. The building had its own generator, standard for pharmaceutical storage. And it was still running, still maintaining the temperature-controlled environment that preserved the chemicals Vasquez needed. "This is it," David said, reading labels by flashlight. Precursor compounds, stabilizing agents, culture media. Everything on Vasquez's list. We loaded fast. Nina's people formed a chain from the shelving to my truck, passing containers hand to hand with the efficiency of people who understood that every minute in exposed territory was a minute too many. My truck's cargo area filled with precisely labeled pharmaceutical supplies, the raw materials of hope, packaged in clinical containers that bore no relationship to the desperate future they represented. 40 minutes. We were done in 40 minutes. Under Whitman's 2-hour estimate by a wide margin. I was beginning to allow myself the thought that this might be the clean operation we needed when David's hand landed on my shoulder. "Listen," he said. I listened. Beyond the loading dock, from the direction of the bypass road, came a sound. Not the random noise of wind or settling structures. It was rhythmic, repetitive. Hundreds of feet hitting pavement in approximate unison. I moved to the dock's edge and looked toward the bypass road. The distance was perhaps a quarter mile. And on that road, moving from east to west, from Halston's residential core toward the industrial park, was a column of infected that stretched beyond my ability to count. Not dozens, not the 30 or 40 that had overwhelmed Carl's checkpoint. Hundreds, maybe more. A migration of the dead, triggered by some stimulus I couldn't identify, moving with collective momentum toward the only sound source in the industrial park. Us. Vehicles. Now. David's voice cut through my paralysis with the precision of a man who'd seen advancing forces before and knew that observation without action was death. I sprinted for my cab. Nina's shooters were already mounting their truck, weapons transitioning from relaxed carry to combat ready with practiced economy. Whitman's Humvee engine roared to life. The column was moving faster now. Not running, they didn't run in large groups, something about the collective mass preventing individual speed. But the pace was accelerating. A quarter mile of distance that would close in minutes if we stayed still. I keyed my ignition, dropped into gear, and pulled away from the loading dock with more force than the loaded cargo probably appreciated. Nina's truck fell in behind me, and Whitman's Humvee took point, leading us toward the northern access road we'd used to enter. The plan was simple. Reverse our approach route, exit the industrial park, rejoin Route 9, return to Kellerman. A plan that assumed our entry route remained clear. It wasn't clear. The northern access road passed within 200 yards of the bypass at its closest point. As we approached that intersection, I could see the leading edge of the column had already crossed it. Infected bodies flowing across our exit route like a river across a bridge. Not a wall, not a solid blockade, but a stream of bodies that would impact our vehicles if we tried to push through. Whitman's Humvee stopped. His brake lights flared in the morning sun, red signals of indecision. David grabbed my radio. We'd been given a shared frequency for the operation. Whitman, don't stop. Push through. Your Humvee can clear them. We follow in your wake. Static. Then Whitman's voice. That's 30, 40 bodies in the road. If they pile up under my wheels, they won't. They'll scatter from the vehicle mass. These aren't tacticians. They're reactive. Push through and we follow. 3 seconds of silence. Then Whitman's Humvee surged forward, accelerating toward the stream of infected crossing the road. The impact was a sound I'd never heard before and never want to hear again. Not the clean crunch of metal on metal, but something wetter, heavier. The sound of physics applied to human bodies without regard for what they'd once been. The Humvee pushed through, bodies caroming off its armored flanks, falling, being driven over or aside. Its passage cleared a corridor, temporary, closing behind it as more infected filled the gap, but open for seconds. Nina's truck went next. Her shooters fired from the bed, not aimed shots, but suppressive volume, the sound alone creating confusion among the infected near the road's edge. Her truck hit the remaining bodies in the corridor and punched through, emerging on the far side trailing something dark from its undercarriage. My turn. The gap was closing. Bodies were filling the space Nina's truck had cleared. I had maybe 4 seconds of passable road. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. 18 tons of loaded freight truck hit that gap at 40 miles per hour. The impacts registered as a series of terrible thuds, some against the bumper, some against the wheels, one against the windshield that spider-webbed the glass, but didn't break through. My truck shuddered, but didn't slow. The mass advantage that had concerned me about the logging truck blockade now worked in my favor. Nothing biological could stop 18 tons at speed. I broke through. Route 9 opened ahead of me, clear and climbing into the hills. Whitman's Humvee was 100 yards ahead. Nina's truck 50. The column was behind us, a tide we'd outrun, a force we'd punctured, but not defeated. David was breathing hard. His hands gripped the dashboard where he'd braced for impact. Everyone accounted for? I checked my mirror. Bent, cracked, but functional. Nina's truck, all shooters visible. Whitman's Humvee, intact. My truck, rattling in a way it hadn't before, but still moving, still climbing. Everyone's through. Then drive, Creed. Drive like you've always known how. I drove. The road carried us back toward Kellerman, toward the fence and the lab and the future that doctor. Vasquez was building from the materials in my cargo hold. The dead owned the streets behind us. Every street, every town, every intersection. But they didn't own this. They didn't own the road beneath my wheels, or the momentum that carried 16 people plus a truckload of pharmaceutical hope toward a destination that mattered. The road remembered me, and I remembered it. 3 months later, I still drive. The antivirals work, not perfectly, not universally, but enough. Enough to begin the slow process of reclamation that Vasquez promised in that first briefing. Kellerman grew from 200 to 800 as word spread. The fence expanded. The perimeter widened. Other bases established contact. A network formed. Tentative, fragile, but real. I drive between them now. Supply runs, personnel transfers, antiviral distribution. The road is never safe. It only offers degrees of danger. But it's mine in a way it wasn't before. Before, the road was a job. Now it's a function, a purpose, an identity forged in the specific crucible of a world that punishes stillness and rewards those who keep moving. David commands Kellerman's security. Nina leads the convoy network. Priya manages logistics. The children grow up in a world that's broken but rebuilding. And me, I own the road. Not because it's safe, not because I've conquered it, but because I understand it, because I know its rhythms, its dangers, its mercies. The dead own the streets, the living own the walls, but the space between, the long, uncertain, essential space between, that belongs to the drivers, that belongs to me.